He is often referred to as the mob's accountant and a financial wizard. But Meyer Lansky wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty when required. Let's check out a violent tale from back in the day of the Bug and Meyer Mob. Welcome to OC Shorts, bringing you detailed historical snapshots of the American Mafia and other organised crime. Feel free to subscribe if you like that sort of thing. Today, we're going to take a quick look at a story where it is claimed that Meyer Lansky shot a man in the head. On the subject of violence, in his later years, Meyer Lansky was quoted as saying, "It's always much better not to shoot if you can help it. It's better to use reason. Or if that fails, threats." However, back in the wild days of the 1920s, when Irish, Jewish and Italian gangs were vying for control of various rackets across New York City, the act of violence was a prerequisite to make it in the underworld. And young Meyer Lansky wasn't afraid to use his hands when necessary. David Ahern, an Irish acquaintance of Meyer Lansky, remembers how the two of them, while still in their teens, were recruited as strong-arm guys for a union organiser in around 1917-1918. Ahern and Lansky were tasked with sorting out the main mechanic of a factory that was being picketed in Peekskills 30 miles up the Hudson River. The union organiser wanted to shut down the factory, and so taking out the main mechanic would slow down production. Ahern remembers following the guy back to his house. "I knocked on the door and a woman responded. I says, 'Telegram,' so she opens the door. When she opened the door, I pushed it right in and I went right into their apartment, and Meyer started going to work on the mail there. That was the mechanic. Lansky had a pipe in hand. He hit the mechanic and the man went down. The mechanic couldn't go back to work after that, and Ahern and Lansky were well rewarded by the union organiser. Fast forward 10 years, and Lansky, now in his mid-20s, was in charge of the Bug and Meyer Mob, with close childhood friend Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. In 1928, Bug and Meyer gang member John Barrett held back part of a shipment of furs that the gang had raided from a warehouse. Allegedly, it was Ben Siegel who discovered Barrett's theft. John Barrett also had issues with how profits from the raids were divvied up between fellow gang members. After the discovery of his deceit, Barrett then attended a sit-down on the 29th of January at 5:30 p.m. on 44th Street in Sunnyside, Queens. The sit-down was chaired by a third party, the infamous Lepke Buchalter, so that any judgment would be impartial. As well as Barrett, in attendance were other members of the Bug and Meyer Mob and members of Lepke's crew. For several hours, various accounts over what had transpired were heard, and Lepke grilled Barrett regarding him withholding the furs. Barrett allegedly pointed a finger at Meyer Lansky and said, "It ain't fair. We take all the risks, and he gets all the gravy." Benny Bugsy Siegel, always ready to defend Lansky, simply responded, "Bull." Barrett was then told to wait in another room while a decision around his crime was made. Lepke and Lansky both came to the conclusion that it wasn't just a matter of a few missing furs, but also mutiny against a gang boss. Barrett returned to the room and at around 8:30 p.m. was escorted, or perhaps coerced, into a car. What happens next in the story varies across sources, and I will cover the different versions now. In the first version, Barrett was put in the shotgun seat of the car next to Benny Siegel, who was driving. Sat behind them were Samuel Red Levine, Joseph Benny the Gambler Benzola, and Meyer Lansky. After driving for a little while, allegedly Little Meyer then pulled out a gun and shot Barrett in the back of the head. However, the bullet didn't kill Barrett. He would later mention how it felt like he'd been hit in the head with a blackjack. Realising what was happening, he claims he then kicked Siegel's foot off the gas pedal and jumped from the car and made a run for it. He arrived at his mother's house covered in blood and was taken to hospital, and it was here that he named Meyer Lansky as his shooter. Another version appears briefly in Robert Lacey's excellent book Little Man, Meyer Lansky and the Gangster's Life. I've included a link below for you so you can check it out for yourselves. The version in Lacey's book is recalled by Lansky's acquaintance David Ahern, who says that he heard the story firsthand from Little Meyer himself. Ahern says that Barrett was driven out of town and then kicked out of the car, where Siegel, Levine, Benzola and Lansky proceeded to use him as target practice as he fled for safety. He started running through the field. He was a hell of a runner, this guy, and they started firing at him. They hit him 4 times. The third version suggests that Barrett was driven to a remote part of town, and just as Samuel Red Levine was about to shoot him, Lansky stopped him and whispered into his ear that if he shot him in the car, blood would go everywhere and stain the seats. Lansky then yelled to Barrett, "Get out!" and he bolted from the car and ran up the street. Siegel then drove the car in pursuit, with Levine leaning out of a window firing shots into Barrett. Regardless of the version, Barrett was lucky to be alive. But he still wasn't safe. Whilst recovering in hospital, Barrett fingered Lansky to the police as the shooter, and he also named the rest of the gangsters in the car. 3 out of the 4 men that Barrett named turned themselves into the police, and on the 7th of March 1928, Meyer Lansky, Joseph Benzola and Samuel Levine found themselves in front of Magistrate Benjamin Marvin on felony assault charges. However, Barrett was reluctant to take the stand, or sign the complaint papers against the group. When Magistrate Marvin asked him who the attackers were, he replied, "Not them," and then stated that these guys were not his assailants. Magistrate Marvin then threatened Barrett with a charge of perjury, but Barrett stuck to his story that these guys were not the men who attacked him. Magistrate Benjamin Marvin had no choice but to dismiss the charges against Lansky, Levine and Benzola. The details behind Barrett's U-turn were revealed by David Ahern decades later. Ahern at the time was serving a 30-year sentence. It is assumed that Ahern was trying to get some time knocked off his prison stretch and started talking to authorities right around the same time that the INS were trying to deport Lansky in 1957. In a sworn testimony, Ahern stated that Lansky had tried to poison Barrett whilst he was recovering in hospital from the shooting. He recalled that Lansky said to him, "I'll tell you what, here's a good idea. Let's go down to Mott Street. I know some ginzo down there and we can get a juiced up chicken. His wife knows I was in the car, so I can't give him the chicken, but you could." So Ahern, with the poisoned meal, met up with Barrett's wife Grace, and he gave her the chicken to pass on to his friend Barrett. However, when Grace brought the food to her husband, he asked her where it was from, and sensibly refused it. It was examined later, and traces of poison were found in the chiboni. At this point, the name of Lansky's close friend, Charlie Luciano, appears in the story. After declining the poisoned chicken, Barrett allegedly said out loud, "That's Luciano's way. They kill sneaky." The whole situation led to the U-turn in the statement that Barrett gave the police. And interestingly, despite the fact that Ben Siegel still wanted to whack him, Lansky let Barrett back into the gang, stating that he felt that he had learnt his lesson and that he would be loyal and dependable from now on. I hope you found that interesting. Thanks for watching.